Good evening to you all. Okay, let me try again. Good evening to you all. Welcome. Good evening to you all. My name is Chris Landsberg. I am the South African National Research Chair in African Diplomacy and Foreign Policy. I also think it might be significant to share with you that I've recently been appointed as the acting director of the much vaunted and long overdue University of Johannesburg Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation. Now, I'm not saying that because I'm the acting director, I'm saying it because we now have the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation launched at UJ, and we plan to, of course, convene a number of significant events around, amongst others, Pan-African thought, the very key issue of the decolonization of the university, which is, of course, one of the many legitimate demands made by students and, of course, also championed by many academics, scholars, researchers, and intellectuals. I would like to, again, this is our first event that we're co-hosting in 2016, but I would like to say thank you, and also thank you to Dr. Guevara, our Executive Director for the Library and Information Center here at UJ, and we, of course, have a very proud relationship with Dr. Bauer and her excellent team in rolling out and convening and co-hosting some of these events. And of course, I have no doubt that this is going to be an excellent start to the year. And on behalf of this partnership, so Dr. Bauer, to you again, thank you. We are delighted that this is our first event for the year in partnership with the library. And it gives me a distinct pleasure to welcome our two guest speakers tonight. I'll say something about our two guest speakers in a moment, but I'd like you to join me in welcoming Ambassador Carlos Fernandez de Cosio, Ambassador of the Republic of Cuba to South Africa. Ambassador, you are most welcome. And of course, we wouldn't be here if it is not for the excellent work done by, I'm inclined to call her my friend, but I haven't seen her in a while, friend and associate Rose Francis, the CEO of Africa Perspectives. Of course, Rose has a long and distinguished career in the area of publishing, and African Perspectives is actually celebrating their 10th anniversary this year. So Rose Francis, welcome to you. Join me in welcoming Madame Rose Francis. This is, of course, not just an important book we're launching tonight. I take it that most of you are familiar with the name and person of the revolutionary, the intellectual Che Guevara. But I'm inclined to say, and I say so without any hesitation, that there's something very unique about this reader that we are launching tonight, because a lot of the writings contained in the reader that we're launching tonight are some of the actual writings and text by Che Guevara himself. And for the first time, it contains perspectives by the leader that we have not been privy to before. So I think we indeed very privileged. Just a couple of house rules, and then I'm going to get the show underway. Some house rules. We are here to fight with each other. We're going to disagree with Theodora, but we're here to fight intellectually. We're going to have very robust, frank, and open conversation. Nobody will be allowed to hog the platform, or to certainly not to hog the microphone. We're also going to try and work with one another and accommodate one another here. So what we're going to do in a moment, after introducing him more formally, I'm going to ask His Excellency, the Ambassador, to join us up front and just share his perspectives on both the reader, the book, and his own thoughts and perspectives on Che Guevara. Following Ambassador, who will address us for about 20 minutes, and following that, I will then call on the CEO and founder of African Perspectives and the co-publisher of this very important reader, Madame Rose Francis, to address us for about 30 minutes. After that, we will open up and we will have dialogues, multi-logs, indeed, we will have engagement. So let me just say something about Ambassador. It's very important for some of our young student leaders, I'm sure they'll be very interested to know that Ambassador has a very distinguished career in diplomacy and in foreign policy from his country, Cuba. But I just want to highlight some of the postings that Ambassador held in some of the key positions. One I'd like to start with is that Ambassador was actually a fighter in Angola during the Angolan War with the Cubans, who played a very important role, not just in the ultimate ending of that war and liberation of Angola itself, but indeed the spillover effects which resulted in the liberation, Ambassador, of Namibia and South Africa. And I want to throw in here, just sort of to entice the conversation tonight, we all know about the famous Battle of Quito Cuanavale, and I would actually challenge you to ask Ambassador a question or two about that. But apart from serving in Angola as a fighter, Ambassador has a distinguished career. Ambassador served at the United Nations as a delegate in the permanent mission of Cuba in New York. Ambassador also served in Canada. Our Ambassador just shared with Dr. Bauer and myself that South Africa must rank as one of his most important and exciting postings, if not the most important, in part because of the historical and very strong ties between South Africa and Cuba. So please join me in welcoming His Excellency, Ambassador. Please come and address us on your perspectives on Che Guevara and on the book. Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, will speak for 20 minutes, as I've said. So join me in welcoming the Ambassador of the Republic of Cuba, Ambassador Carlos de Cosio. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you for your very generous introduction. Dr. Bawa, Chris, Comrade Rose Francis, comrades, friends. I want to thank, first of all, the organizers of this event for inviting me to speak about this book, which in many ways is to speak about Che Guevara. And I want to congratulate those that conceived the idea of holding it in a library. Among the many characteristics of Che Guevara, without doubt, is that he could be identified as a man of books. So it would be very proper for him to know that his books of his writings is being launched in a library. I must say at the outset that for a Cuban revolutionary of my generation, it is not easy to speak about Che Guevara in calm. It's not easy to speak without passion about Che Guevara, free from a dose of sentimental subjectivity. It's a generation that was highly influenced by the life, the actions, and the teachings of Che Guevara. The book that we are discussing today is a remarkable compilation of some of Che Guevara's writings, including his speeches, essays, letters, and articles that he published at different times. And it's a book that comes at a very significant moment and that would be very useful for South Africans, for Africans, and for people in the third world in general to study. And I find I would identify three basic elements that would make this a very important book. First of all is the fact that the image of Che Guevara is very known. It's a common image that you find in many places. Unfortunately, many times as a commercial icon, which is very, very far away from what he would have thought and what he stood for. Many young people use t-shirts with the image of Che or bags with the image of Che without knowing what is behind that image. It is commercialized in bars. Sometimes it's spoken of in sports events without knowing what is behind that image and who Che Guevara is. And without understanding the history of the individual, his impact, and his contribution to the lives of millions of people. So making a compilation of this book and encouraging, above all, young people to study it would help a lot for youngsters and for future generations to understand the social obligations that as human beings we have in the communities where we live and the communities with which we engage. And in many ways to try to set a paradigm on how to solve social issues. Another importance of the book, in my opinion, is that it shows clearly that you cannot separate Che Guevara from Cuba or from the Cuban Revolution. You cannot speak of the history of the Cuban Revolution, or the military struggle that led to power in January of 1959, or the radical transformations that took place in Cuba in a very short period of time between 1959 and the beginning of the 1960s. You cannot speak of Cuba's foreign policy and the design of it, nor of building socialism in Cuba, if you ignore the role and the participation of Che Guevara. And in the same way, you cannot understand Che if you don't take into account the fact that he was formed as a revolutionary in the Cuban Revolution. He himself wrote that a true revolutionary needs a revolution to be able to act. He consolidated his ideas of how to attain power in a revolutionary manner, of how to consolidate it, of how to transform a society, on which are the issues that mattered for the poor people of this world, and how to try to solve them from Cuba, and projecting himself and as being one of those that projected internationally and within the country the Cuban Revolution. It is impossible to understand the values that became part of him if you don't take into account the history of the Cuban Revolution. And at the same time, you cannot understand the values that led hundreds of thousands of Cubans, for example, to be ready to voluntarily fight in the battlefields of Angola, if you don't take into account the contributions made by Che Guevara as a leader of the revolution. A third importance of the book, and something that has to be taken into account when one reads it, is that it shows Che Guevara within the circumstances of the period in history in which he lived. This is tricky. Che was not a desk revolutionary. He was a man of action. and he was an intellectual, but an intellectual of action. He put his huge intellectual energy, his effort in studying, to commit it to a purpose, to the task at hand. While they were in the mountains of the Sierra Maestra, to study which were the military elements and the political elements required to achieve the objective of military victory and to gain power. He studied which were the elements needed to carry out the radical transformations in Cuba. He studied which were the basis of socialism, to be able to build socialism in a small country in the third world with the largest imperialism power in the world, just as a neighbor of Cuba. And he studied which were the needs and the requirements of the third world, and which were the revolutionary elements of his time. And I say this because as a student of this book, and some do sometimes when they reach it, they can become hypercritical and say, yes, but what Che says here about Peru isn't exactly what happened later. Or his description of revolutionary conditions in Colombia did not take into account so and so. Or his view of Africa and the revolutionary conditions of Africa were limited. And all of that is true. He was a man that used his intellectual power based on the information that were at his disposal at the time. And you have to understand that in the 1960s, for him, for the Cuban revolutionaries, and for revolutionaries over most part of the world, for example, information about Africa came from European sources, from the sources of the colonizers. So if you find that sometimes his views at the time of Africa, for example, were limited, there's a reason for that. And it's logical for them to be like that. But as I said, he was a man of action. He did not try to interpret or to intellectualize about Africa sitting in a desk in Cuba or some other part of the world. He came to Africa, joined the guerrilla movement in Congo against the forces of Mobutu Sese Seko, together with comrades and fighters from Africa, and there learned in the field about Africa. The book shows you also that he did not dedicate his thinking or his knowledge to theorize about the Russian agrarian revolution or World War I or the Nuremberg trials. He dedicated with discipline his intellectual energy to the revolution in the third world. And that's what he thought about. And how to construct socialism in a country of the third world. How to challenge powerful existing forces that were oppressing the people all over the world. And that's a third importance about this book. It is not a biography. If you're looking for a biography of Che, this is not it. It's better than that. It is his thinking, his view of the world, his lessons written by himself, shared, analyzed, intellectualized by himself. There are biographies of Che Guevara. I know 3 of them, only one of which has some value. One written by the Mexican Pablo Ignacio Tagle. But even that one cannot reflect what we should know and what we need to know about Che Guevara more than what he himself wrote. And most of it, or an important part of it, is contained in this book, this reader about Che Guevara. Now, Che was without doubt a remarkable man, a man of many virtues. He was an outstanding military commander. He was an astute politician, a man that you could not do without at the initial moments of the Cuban Revolution, when you had to retain power and carry out the radical transformations, to be loyal, as the leaders of the revolution were, to the promises that they made while in the mountains and while the guerrilla fight was in place. He was the man that you needed when you started the profound economic transformations in the country. Even though by training he was not an economist, he was a medical doctor. He was a man we needed to project the Cuban foreign policy in many parts of the world. And at one moment, the Cuban Revolution had to be loyal also to the commitment made with him when in Mexico he signed up, which was that once power was gained, victory, once the revolution was consolidated, that we should let him be free to go to his homeland in Argentina or to other parts of the world to carry out with the ideal of taking justice and revolution, helping the efforts of oppressed people from other parts of the world. In doing so, in his letter of farewell to Fidel, he said, "Wherever I go, and regardless of where my last moments are, I can assure you that I carry the heavy responsibility of being a Cuban revolutionary." And that in Cuba is something that we know clearly, that even though he was not born in our land, even though he left our land, didn't die in Cuba and went to carry out internationalist missions in other parts of the world, that he was one of us, a Cuban revolutionary in the sense that of what he believed that meant. Now, this man of extraordinary values, Fidel, at the moment of his death, when he spoke, said, if we want to think of which would be the ideal paradigm of a revolutionary, how would we like our future comrades to behave like themselves? How would we like our children to be? Without any doubt whatsoever, we can responsibly say that we would like them to be like Che. Now, we should not take this to think that everybody can be Che or should be Che Guevara. He's a man that combined a group of virtues that were manifested in a specific moment in history. And we like to think that individuals like him, men and women, young men and young women, could be found in many parts of the world, but that perhaps have not had the circumstances, the experience in which he lived, that allowed him to be known and to be able to manifest all these virtues. When we say that we would like future revolutionaries, citizens from our country and from many parts of the world, to imitate Che, we're not saying that we want them to be exactly like him. But if men and women, if young men and women of today's world try to emulate some of his virtues, I think society would be better off than it is today. And we have to think that if we believe that a better world is possible, then we also have to believe that men like Che Guevara and the example of Che Guevara with a new man is necessary. I would like to, before I finish, quote just some sentences said by Che that illustrate part of his thinking about socialism. He said, I quote, "For us, there is no valid definition of socialism other than the abolition of the exploitation of one man being by another, of one human being by another. As long as this has not been achieved, if we think we are in the stage of building socialism, but instead of ending exploitation, the work of suppressing it becomes to a halt, or worse, reversed, then we cannot speak of building socialism. In 1964, a woman with the last name Guevara, like him, wrote him a letter inquiring if it was possible for them to be related. And he wrote them several things. But the last sentence says, "I don't think you and I are very closely related. But if you are capable of trembling with indignation each time that an injustice is committed in the world, we are comrades." And that is much more important. He wrote to his children his farewell letter that was supposed to be given to the very small children in the event of his death, which happened in October 1967. And among the things he said, grow up as good revolutionaries. Study hard so that you can master technology, which allows us to master nature. Remember that the revolution is what is important, and each one of us alone is worth nothing. Above all, always be capable of feeling deeply any injustice committed against anyone, anywhere in the world. This is the most beautiful quality in a revolutionary. And finally, to Fidel, he said in his letter, "I state once more that I free Cuba from any responsibility except that which stems from its example. In my final hour, find me under other skies. My last thought will be for this people, and especially for you. I am thankful for your teaching, your example, and I will try to be faithful up to the final consequences of my acts. Wherever I am, I will feel the responsibility of being a Cuban revolutionary, and I shall behave as such." Thank you very much.
So when I introduced the ambassador, I omitted to say, and it was my oversight, I omitted to point out, and I'm sure it'll become clear, but I omitted to say that ambassador is a scholar in his own right. And just the mastery and the sheer authority with which ambassador handled that profound and brilliant introduction, I think bears testimony to the fact that the ambassador himself is a scholar in his own right, holding a PhD from University of Havana. So Ambassador, before I introduce and welcome again Madam Rose Francis, see what is so significant for me about our launch of this reader tonight. UJ has set for itself the very ambitious goal that comes with enormous responsibility of wishing to become the epicenter of Pan-African thought and reflection in South Africa. It's ambitious, comes with enormous responsibilities. One of the immediate tasks we've set for ourselves is to debate the idea of decolonization. So you might wonder, where am I going with this? See, when we talk about decolonization, at least as far as I'm concerned, we have in mind, in the words of Achille Mbembe, the scholar from Wits, the decommissioning of a dominant colonial paradigm. You decolonize what is dominant colonially. And of course, that dominance is Eurocentricity. I mean, you yourself alluded to it. The Europeans think for Africans, and they think that civilization derives from Europe. But what decolonization means is we're going to have to subject ourselves to other paradigms and perspectives from Asia, from the continent of Africa, and indeed from Latin and Central America. And I think the readings of Che Guevara goes a very long way to help us to achieve that goal. And that brings me to introducing again Madam Rose Francis. So when I asked Rose, so how do I introduce you given your long and illustrious career, she was very clear when she said, just remind them about the fact that I am the founder and CEO of African Perspectives, but also she pointed out that the students in particular know that one of her proudest moments, she believes, is achievements is that she has to date traveled 39 of Africa's 55 countries. 39. Because we know we have 55 countries, because in 1884-85, a bunch of European leaders got around the table over bottles of port and other liquid elements and decided to draw maps on this continent of Africa. But one of the goals is, of course, to understand and learn from the entire continent, travel every country, and help and get there to help her to shape her own worldview in her own words. It's indeed a privilege, Rose, to ask you to come and address us. And please, while you're at it, share with us just some background about African Perspectives and how it came about that you played such an instrumental role in getting the intellectual rights to be part of this arena and bringing about South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, students, Rose Francis.
Thank you. Professor Baum, is it on?
No, it's not. That one doesn't work.
This one doesn't work? Okay. Professor Baum, Professor Landsberg, Comrade Ambassador of Cuba, comrades, ladies and gentlemen in the audience, good evening. I hate standing in front of people to talk. I am a background person that does things. I feel much more comfortable making things happen. But I'm very proud to be the publisher, the co-publisher of this book. And later on in the evening, it will be for sale at 250 Rand. I wanted to say for a moment how I managed to achieve the rights for this book. Che Guevara, the daughter of Che Guevara, was in the country, a leader, who's a pediatrician. And I met her at Freedom Park in Pretoria. She was here to place a veil, a wreath on the Cuban soldiers' graves. So I watched her and listened to an interview that she appeared on SAFM later on in the week. And a few days later, called the Cuban embassy and presented what my intentions were. The fact that the daughter of Che Guevara, comrade and leader, didn't speak any English didn't make any difference to me. We got a interpreter and we spoke all about various things, traveling on the continent and so on. And within 6 weeks after that, I received a letter from the Che Guevara Study Center in Havana saying, we have acknowledged your intention to publish the book. And within, I think, a month after that, I had the PDF of this book. So I do believe that if you want to do things, you can do them. You have to have what a lot of Jewish people say, chutzpah. But I wanted to just talk also about the traveling through the continent. I've had the occasion of staying for living in Ghana for a year, I think in 2013, because as an African living in South Africa, I wanted to ensure that there's one thing reading history, there's another thing living history. And I wanted to be on the continent, I wanted to be in the countries that, for me, shaped my worldview. And certainly Ghana, as one of the first Pan-African countries that achieved freedom, was important for me. And so was Tanzania, and I lived in Rwanda and worked there, and so on. So, yes, my worldview is really constantly shaped by the countries I live in, because as I say, there's one thing actually learning theory, and there's another thing living it. I lived for a year without running water, not having a car, but living in the most absolute pleasurous situations. That really has to ask, when you ask yourself, what is it to be an African? You know, yeah. So I wanted to just thank you for that. And Professor Chris has been somebody who's been, way before I even started the publishing company, I used to list companies in the stock market. The first BE deal in this country, I was part of the listing group. Professor Chris was there mentoring me in various ways, sporadically, together with Dr. Adia Debajo, mentoring me on African history. So it's incredible that 10 years later, I am now celebrating 10 years of African Perspectives publishing, and we are now talking to Comrade Ambassador. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you for that, Rose. I shouldn't try and add anything. I'm just going to embarrass myself. The floor is open for engagement. Ambassadors here, the co-publisher is here. The floor is open. So I'm going to take about 5 inputs, questions, comments.